Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of Meteorological Terms 101. And today we're going to be going over humidity and we're going to be explaining what it actually is used for in weather forecasting. The other thing we'll be going over is really what the difference between it and dew point are, since this can be a misleading or not too understood term. So let's go over it. But before we dive into it, there's one thing you have to note is when typical weather apps or weather services such as National Weather Service or like the Weather Channel, typically when they refer to humidity or when really anyone refers to humidity, they're typically and always referring to relative humidity. We'll get to more on this in a second. So now let's dive into it. So here are the two things we're going to be comparing today: humidity and dew point. Firstly, we're going to be going over dew point. So, what is dew point? Dew point is the temperature at which airs need to be cooled to become saturated. So, for example, dew point is typically the temperature at which air would have to be cooled to become saturated. So, let's just say if we had for instance, down here, this little box here that I drew out. For instance, if the temperature was 80 degrees and the dew point was 60 degrees, basically, what that meaning is that the dew point temperature or the surface temperature or the air temperature has to decrease to that 60 degrees to become fully saturated, in which you would have things such as the potential for fog development or even cloud development, depending on the altitude in the atmosphere that this process occurs. So let's continue to go over it. So here's a better example. This is provided by National Weather Service. They put this out on one of their web pages. But basically, it's saying that you have like a surface temperature of 30 degrees Celsius and then 18 degrees Celsius at the surface. And as the air temperature rises, it naturally cools. This is what you would call your adiabatic rate, or depending on what environment, it could be a dry adiabatic rate or a moist adiabatic rate. We'll go over those terms in another video. But basically, as it rises, the temperature rises and naturally cools due to the less amount of air molecules in that as you go up in the atmosphere. Because of this, again, yes, it cools, and then once it cools to your dew point temperature, that's when it becomes fully saturated, and that's when you have your relative humidity at around 100% or completely saturated. So things that can cause would be, for instance, dew. That's what it's mainly used for, or one of the main things that it's what it's known for, the dew point. You can help forecast for dew possibility, and fog. Fog is another thing to be able to know when it forms. Another thing to note if you're wanting to forecast for fog is looking for an environment that, yes, has a lot of moisture content and the dew point and temperature are closely together, but also having very light winds. So then there's not too much mixing to occur between the moist and dry air. Typically, when you're wanting to look for, the layers of the atmosphere when it comes to trying to find out where the fog development, you would typically want to look at something like a skew-t chart. So this is a little bit of a snippet of a skew-t chart that basically shows you a typical fog sounding you would see on a winter day, because you have those cold temperatures at the surface, and then you have a little bit of that cooling with height, but then you have your temperature inversion due to cooling from the day before. As you go into the night hours, you, depending on how warm it was or even how much moisture was the day before, you'll have that rise of temperature inversion you get. And typically temperature inversions happen really any time of the season. They can typically found during the winter time, but then also they're a big deal during severe weather events such as like severe thunderstorms and supercells and stuff. But again, that will be covered in a different video at some point. So basically, what you're seeing here is the red is the temperature, and then the green is the dew point. So here, This is a better example of what a skew-t chart actually looks like. So you have your surface temperature of 86, and then your dew point of 64. So basically, what this is, it's a 2D representation of basically the atmosphere at the location it was taken by. Um, this actually is a modeled version. You can have either modeled soundings or observed soundings. This one is a modeled sounding. You can typically find model soundings from multiple various sources, such as Pivotal Weather. Like this is where I got mine from. Pivotal Weather, observed soundings. You can get things from like National Weather Service, Storm Prediction Center. They'll have them there. But anyway, this is just a brief little explanation of what it is. So you have your red temperature, which is your temperature, and then you have your green, which is your dew point. And then if you're wondering what this white dotted line is, that is your projected air parcel path. So that's basically the estimation of what an air parcel, how it would travel if it were to rise here. And basically it's a good forecasting for severe weather. The term we use for this, for the in-between space between here, would be CAPE. And then if you have any of that, again, if you go back to the first one, if you have any of this, capping inversion or temperature inversion, and you have that dotted line to go kind of in it, and then you go out, that's that little space in it. That would be SIN or CIN, which is convective inhibition. Basically, negative energy that basically can prevent thunderstorms and stuff from growing. Anyway, on to the next one. So another thing that dew point is very helpful with, again, is severe thunderstorm development. Yes, like things like derechos, supercells, all the above. You can typically find on severe weather days and stuff like that. Here's a guide for if you're not too familiar with dew point. This basically kind of shows you at what temperature of dew points really feel. It can either feel dry or even, if you go up to like 75 degrees, that can be quite oppressive. And even anything above that, you can actually have up to 80-degree dew points. Technically, you can have really any, value of dew point, but it's typically, you find if you get into the 80s, that would be more in like the very far south and in the tropic region. But anyway, basically, so anything under 55 degrees dew point or under is considered dry because there's not as much needing to be condensed by. And typically when you have 55-degree dew points, you typically only have like 50, 60-degree weather. So it doesn't require as much moisture content as it would be for a typical hot and humid day like in the 60s and 70s. So yeah, anything between 60 to 64 is between comfortable and slightly humid, and then anything past 65 to 70 and above is considered humid to very humid. And then once you get into past 75, that's when it gets so oppressive. So yeah, just a simple little guide. This one is found by National Weather Service again. You can find this by one of their websites. You can find that. So I explained dew point to you. Now let's go over humidity. Now this is the one we've been wanting to look at. So what is humidity? Humidity is really how much water vapor is in the air compared to how much water vapor could be held at a given temperature. For example, if the relative humidity is 50%, the air is holding half of its maximum capacity for water vapor at that current temperature. So again, relative humidity of 100% means the air is saturated. So here's another example. Look at this image right here. So each of these glasses here that you see in this image represents really kind of giving you an idea of what percentages of relative humidity really refers to. So for example, the second glass showing relative humidity of 50%. So 50% of that glass is filled with water. That meaning that that glass is 50% closer to becoming saturated. So the fourth glass right here, that fourth glass has 100% water content in it. So that air within that fourth glass is considered saturated. But then when you have the first glass, which has no water in it, that means that it's completely dry. There's no water vapor in the air, and it would just be extremely dry. Now, you may have witnessed this or seen this on like your weather app or something. It might be wondering, why does this happen when you have I haven't had it listed on here, but you have the temperature decrease, so the dew point decreases, but then you also see the humidity increase. What's going on here? You may have seen this before where you have your dew point decreasing, but then all of a sudden you see your humidity decrease or increasing. You might be like, that doesn't make sense. You would think, oh, the dew point, how does this work? So I put together an example for you. Here's an example. This is not a real life example. I just came up with this. Basically, I did fact check this, so this actually could happen in real life. It just has to be at a certain thing. But anyway, so let's imagine you have surface temperatures of 75 degrees Fahrenheit and dew point of 60. So naturally, you have humidity around 61%. Let's then imagine, let's just say there was a cold front that came through, okay? You have a cold front, and then those temperatures got pushed down all the way, for some reason, all the way down to 55. Now, because it got passed, if you remember from the other one, you see the dew point was around 60. Now, let's just say, again, you have that cold front that comes through, and it gets pushed past that 60 mark and got pushed back. Now, when you have this type of interaction with the dew point and temperature, it basically causes an extra amount, or what we also would call supersaturation in meteorology. It's basically when you have humidity that gets pushed past 100%. Now, humidity, the percentage can't go over 100%, but if it gets pushed to 100, but then it continues to get pushed and pushed and pushed, that's what we have called supersaturation. And when you have that type of push with the temperature and dew point, that's why you have your humidity just spike to 100%. And for this example, you would have things like fog formation and then cloud formation, depending on what altitude of the atmosphere this gets affected by. So, what is humidity used for in weather forecasting? Well, it can be used for predicting things such as rain, snow, and sleet, and etc. It can definitely be helpful for that, and then it also can be used for fog formation, and then even areas on a weather map where clouds could occur or form or that type of thing. That's kind of what it helps for, and then also helps with monitoring drought conditions in like areas that have, hasn't received or seen too much high humidity days. Usually, it can help with monitoring those conditions. And finally, here are some things to remember. The closer the temperature is to the dew point, the higher the relative humidity. And the bigger the gap between them, the lower the relative humidity. So basically, vice versa. And then, here's a little guide for kind of fog formation right down here. When the dew point and temperature are close together at the surface, fog and or dew is possible to occur. But then again, just for that little helpful tip, fog has a better chance of forming when surface winds or just winds in general, depending on the altitude, are light, because it helps prevent too much of that mixing to occur. So, thank you for watching. If you managed to make this far, I really appreciate you watching my videos. I'll be hopefully be able to post out some more videos at some point, going over more topics such as severe weather and explaining different types of things that are found when looking at severe weather parameters and stuff like that. So anyway, thank you for watching again. Be sure to like and subscribe for more of these videos. So see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.